So it's Pentecost, and since we told the entire story of Pentecost to the kids and to all of us, I'm not going to read that very, very long second chapter of Acts, things that goes through all the names of all the nations. Some of you have heard it. I think you get the basic story, and instead, the first reading is going to be John chapter 16, verses 12 through 15, where Jesus was talking about the Spirit. Jesus said, "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. But when the Spirit of truth comes, that one will guide you into all truth. For the Spirit will not speak on its own, but will speak whatever the Spirit hears, and will declare to you the things that are to come. The Holy Spirit will glorify me because it will take what is mine and declare it to you. All that the Father has is mine. For this reason, I said that God will take what is mine and declare it. Greek could be translated, make real to you." The second text is from the book of Acts, the first chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. When all the disciples had come together, they asked Jesus, "Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel?" And Jesus replied, "It's not for you to know the times or periods that God has set by God's own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and in Samaria and to all the ends of the earth." And when Jesus had said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. I'll read just the beginning of the Acts 2 text. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one accord. And suddenly, from heaven, there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Well, Pentecost is a bit of a challenge because it is understood in so many different ways by so many different denominations or groups of Christians. It reminded me of a joke that I get a kick out of. It's, how many Christians does it take to put in a light bulb? For the charismatics, only one, because their hands are already in the air. For the Pentecostals, 1 to change the bulb and 9 to pray against the spirit of darkness. For Presbyterians, none. Lights will go on and off at predestined times. For Roman Catholics, none. Candles only, or guaranteed origin, of course. For Baptists, at least 15, 1 to change the light bulb, and 3 committees to approve the change and decide who brings the potato salad and the fried chicken. For the Episcopalians, 3, 1 to call the electrician, 1 to mix the drinks, and 1 to talk about how much better the old one was. For the Mormons, 5, 1 man to change the bulb and 4 wives to tell him how to do it. For Unitarians, which would be the closest to the United Church of Christ, we choose not to make a statement either in favor of or against the need for a light bulb. However, if you in your own journey have found that the light bulb works for you, you are invited to write a poem or compose a modern dance around your light bulb for the next Sunday service, in which we will explore a number of light bulb traditions, including incandescent, fluorescent, 3-way, long life and timed, all of which are equally valid paths to incandescence. Methodists, undetermined. Whether your light is bright, dull, or completely out, you are loved. You can be a light bulb, turnip bulb, or tulip bulb. Bring a bulb of your choice on the next Sunday lighting service and a covered dish to pass. For the Nazarenes, 6, 1 woman to replace the bulb while 5 men review church lighting policy. And finally, the Lutherans, none. Lutherans don't believe in change. Ooh. And finally, the Amish. What's a light bulb? So many different things you could get into when we're talking about Pentecost. And it's the first Sunday of the month, lots going on. We're not going to begin to get into it all. As I shared with the kids, it's the birthday of the church. Jesus was killed in Jerusalem during the Passover feast when thousands and thousands of Jews from other countries and lands would be in Jerusalem for the festival. The next big festival was 50 days later, 7 times 7 weeks. I won't go into the Jewish tradition, but it was a festival called Shavuot in Hebrew, primarily a thanksgiving for the first fruits of the harvest, the wheat harvest, and it was later associated with a remembrance of the laws given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Jesus knew that the city once again would be full of people from all over. So he instructs his disciples to go there and to wait for the promise of God, which Jesus told them he would send, the Spirit. In John, it's also called or translated as the Advocate. Jesus told them that this Spirit would guide them into all truth and make the things of God real to them. And it would give them power. Now, there's a lot more than just that, but even just dealing with that is more than we can deal with today, even. I got this far in my sermon prep, and I realized I'm not going to be able to pull this off today. But thank God I'm here next week. And so will these lovely Pentecost artistic symbols. And so we're going to continue next week with some of the implications of Pentecost. It's too important to skip it over. But today, I just wanted to focus on 2 basic things. First, beyond the fire and the wind and the power, the miracle was, as I shared with the kids, that they started talking in languages that they didn't know. Now, lots of different denominations try to put that light bulb in different ways. But they were speaking of the things of God in languages that other people could understand. Some scholars have suggested that Pentecost was actually the healing of or the reversal of what happened in the Old Testament at the Tower of Babel, when human pride and arrogance and ambition caused the scattering of the people and the dividing them up into different languages so that they were separated and divided and in competition. Scholars have suggested that Pentecost was the opposite of that. You see it? Bringing the people back together and giving the disciples the capacity to articulate in a language that was not natural to them what God was doing so that other people could understand it and people who had been separated could come together. So I hope you get why this is important. Human ego and pride cause divisions and the inability to understand each other. Often an impasse, an unwillingness to work together. The Holy Spirit brings people together. And if we're open to it, shows us how to communicate and understand each other in ways that did not and could not, or we could not do without the Spirit helping us. Now, I'm going to say more about that next week, but I wanted to just plant that seed and make that one point first. The Spirit enables us to figure out ways to communicate across divisions that have, up until this point, separated us. If there was ever a time in history when the world needed this, it's now. We have got to find a new way to talk to each other. In churches, to work together, but in our society. We are up against too many impasses, and we cannot even come together, and the lines are getting deeper. We need a miracle of Pentecostal power of communication right now. And part of our question is, how can we be a part of that? In just some tiny, small little way. How can we be a community that God can use to open up some new conversations, some deeper understandings where people are divided? Okay, so that's the first point. The second big point is that the day of Pentecost brings us to the importance of being together, of being in community. And this is a real simple point, but it's one of the hardest ones for people in our culture to get. Being on the path of Jesus does involve opening ourselves up as individuals to the presence and the power of the Spirit. And Jesus shows us how to do that. He's not the only one that can open someone or help someone to a spiritually grounded path that's beautiful and life-giving. There are other expressions of that. We gather around the Jesus story. That's our path. And it's important for us as individuals, but while we all need our own personal experience of the Spirit, Pentecost is the time when we are reminded that what Jesus was really after was a community, a people. Being on the Jesus path isn't about each of us figuring out a way to be close to God. And, you know, you've heard me say it many times. People say, oh, I don't need to come to church to be close to God. No, you don't. But you do need to be a part of a community if you want to be on the path of Jesus. So, just as we hopefully all celebrate and give thanks for ways in which God has become real to us as individuals, we also commit ourselves to a process of, and we commit ourselves to a process of lifelong awakening. Pentecost is a reminder that we need to be a part of the church or of some spiritual community. So here's the part that's hard for us to understand. There are no lone rangers when it comes to the path of Jesus. This isn't just about you and God. It's about us and God. We are a people seeking God together. And that's why Pentecost is so important. It's God's way of saying, like it or not, we are in this together. And we don't get to handpick who we do this with. Like it or not, we're stuck with each other, with whoever shows up. So turn to the person next to you now and say, like it or not, you and I are stuck with each other. Go ahead, give it a try. And here's where being together is important. Because being together is where the power is. And we all need God's power. If we're going to even walk an inch on this path. I know quite a few of you are familiar with the 12-step movements or the recovery movements, Friends of Bill. AA, NA, Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. Some of you I know are either in one of those or close to someone who is. Just about all of us are. I agree with my beloved Richard Rohr that the 12-step movement is American spirituality's unique spiritual gift to give to the rest of the world. The most significant thing that has happened spiritually in the United States and globally. So you know what I'm talking about. The power is ultimately in the fellowship. There's lots more content of the 12 steps, including developing a personal spirituality. But what every person in recovery knows is that he, she, or they could not find the power to get free from the vice grips of their addiction on their own. As they often tell a newcomer, this is a we program. God shows up in our being together. So that's why Pentecost, or what Pentecost rather, has been trying to tell the church since that first experience in the second chapter of Acts. We need, as individuals and as congregations, the power of the presence of God's Spirit that we find by coming together. So to be even more blunt, and not the least bit passive-aggressive, this is why coming to worship is really important. And that includes Zoom. I love that we have this extended community together now. And I have joked over the years, I'm not the least bit legalistic about coming to church. And you know, if this is your first time in a while, this isn't aimed at you, okay? I mean, just hear this. Being a Christian is about being together, seeking God together, and there is some direct correlation between making a commitment to being together as often as possible and how much you yourself will get out of it. If you come here with the attitude of how can I be a blessing? Maybe someone here needs my presence this morning more than I need to be here even. If you come with that attitude, I guarantee you will receive more from God simply by showing up with that attitude. And but I'll be the first one to say, hey, on a nice summer day, if I weren't the pastor, I wouldn't be here myself, probably. So, I mean, I get it, so go out and enjoy yourself now. I'm talking about, in general, making a commitment to trying to be in worship. And it reminds me of a joke. There was this guy, Johnny, and his mother woke him up one Sunday morning and said, Johnny, hey, you got to get up. It's time for church. And Johnny said, I don't want to go to church. And his mom said, well, you got to go to church. And he said, give me two. She said, she said, give me two good reasons why you shouldn't go to church. And he said, no problem. I don't like them and they don't like me. And then he said, well, give me two good reasons why I can. She said, no problem. You're 45 years old and you're the pastor. Okay, well, I got to be here. And I love being here. I really do. But today, I'm just going to come out and say it. I love when you're here, too. It's better when there's more of us here. Not just because I like seeing the numbers on the attendance rolls go up and it makes my ego feel good. Because we bring a collective energy and power together. I mean, you all feel it. But, the Easter and the Christmas swell, you can lament that, hey, we're here every Sunday, where you been, but it's nice feeling the energy of a bunch of people here together trying to do this together. Even just the numbers does matter. It's not all about that ever. All right, well, I think I've made that point. So I'm going to close. And this is one of those times where I'm not going to, tie this all together for you. I'm going to let the Spirit do that. But the final word today is, before we share communion and our closing hymn, goes to Martin Luther King Jr. In many ways, we see in his life how the Holy Spirit spoke to him both personally, but then drove him to form a community that brought change to the world. And that's what this is all about. People often forget or dismiss the role that the Holy Spirit played in Dr. King's life and in the civil rights movement itself. So here's what was written in an article. Although Martin Luther King has long been hailed as a civil rights leader, he's also one of the great spiritual leaders of our time. Lewis Baldwin, professor of religious studies at Vanderbilt University, believes that one aspect of his life has been often overlooked, and that is the role of prayer and calling upon the power of the Holy Spirit. King always made it clear that his civil rights and political activities were an extension of his ministry. For King, personal prayer and public prayer were equally significant. Public prayer was important to him because he understood prayer as a form of creative energy and power. It was a way of motivating, affirming, and empowering people in the struggle for equal rights. Prayer was King's secret weapon, he said, in the civil rights movement, and the key to its success. In seeking the Holy Spirit in prayer, King and the people found the strength to continue despite arrests and killings. Here's the important part. In 1956, after a midnight call from a racist who threatened to kill Dr. King and destroy his home, King had a transformative, mystical experience of the Holy Spirit speaking to him. He retreated to his kitchen, and over a cup of coffee, he poured out his heart to God. He said, "Lord, I'm down here trying to do what is right, but now I'm afraid. I'm afraid, God. And I can't let the people see me like this, because if they see me weak and losing my courage, they might lose theirs as well. I'm at the end of my powers, God. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't do this on my own. I can't face this alone." Shortly after he prayed that, King recounts, he experienced the divine presence breaking through to him like he had never experienced God before. And he actually heard an inner voice. He could have questioned whether or not it was God, but somehow he knew it was. And the voice inside him assured him and said to him, "King, stand up for justice. King, stand up for justice." And he knew that God was with him, and that God would be with him until the end, no matter what happened. And in standing in the need of prayer, his wife Coretta writes, "When Martin stood up from the table that night, he was imbued with a new sense of confidence, and he was ready to face anything. God's Spirit had filled him with power." 3 days later, his house was bombed. Fortunately, no one was harmed. But King claims that this experience he had that night of the Holy Spirit speaking to him was one of his most revelatory spiritual experiences and a turning point in his life and in his leadership, as well as the entire civil rights movement. He often referred to this in his sermons, saying that he had a vision of God telling him one night, "Stand up, Martin. Stand up and fight for justice." Well, next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about experiences maybe you have had, or I have had, or others have had. I think it is time that we deliberately, consciously open ourselves up to these kinds of experiences. Not that if you don't have one, you're not a real Christian. That's nonsense. But how is God speaking to us? How is God leading us? And how are we welcoming the power to be the church? Because God knows we need it. I'll end there.